As the world is swallowed by a blizzard's relentless grip, darkness seeps into every corner and chilling secrets emerge from the snow. Imagine being trapped in a storm so fierce it hides an unseen terror that preys on your deepest fears. Tonight, we uncover true, spine-tingling stories of blizzards that bring more than just cold. Real horrors that will haunt your mind long after the storm has passed. Prepare yourself. This is the eerie truth behind the blizzard's darkness. But before we delve into tonight's terrifying tales, a huge shout out to all of you. Your support fuels this channel and keeps the nightmares coming. If our eerie stories captivate you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a chilling episode. And if you want to help us grow and keep the fear alive, share our videos, drop a comment, or explore our support options on Patreon or Ko-fi. Every bit of support helps us bring you the best spine-tingling content. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey. Now let's embrace the shadows together. In the fall of 2015, during winter break from college, I found myself alone in our remote upstate New York home. It was a place of comforting seclusion, a quaint house nestled among dense woods, known for its serene beauty and at times its eerie isolation. That night, the world outside was encased in a freezing silence, only occasionally disturbed by the howling wind. I had settled into the couch, wrapped in a blanket, with the fireplace crackling softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Netflix played quietly on the TV, and I was completely engrossed in my binge-watching. The warmth from the fire was a welcome cocoon against the biting cold outside. Little did I know, the night was about to turn from peaceful to terrifying. Without any warning, the room was plunged into darkness. The power had gone out, snuffing out the comforting glow of the fireplace and TV. My heart skipped a beat. I reached for my phone, using its weak light to navigate the pitch-black room. I fumbled through the darkness, trying to locate a flashlight, but all I found was the oppressive silence of the night. With no immediate solution to the power outage, I resigned myself to waiting for my parents to return, hoping they would fix the problem soon. I must have drifted off, as I was jolted awake by a creeping sense of dread. The room felt thicker, as though it were holding its breath. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a tall, menacing silhouette standing beside the couch. Suddenly, the power flickered back to life, casting an eerie, unstable light around the room. What I saw left me breathless with fear. Standing just inches away from me was a man in his mid-30s, gaunt and disheveled, his clothes stained and torn, streaked with what looked like blood. The sight was grotesque, and my first instinct was to scream, but fear had me frozen in place. The man's voice was a trembling whisper as he explained that he had been in a car accident nearby and was seeking help. His disheveled appearance and the blood on his clothes lent some credibility to his story, but my terror was palpable. I couldn't help but wonder if he was telling the truth or if there was something more sinister at play. Shaking uncontrollably, I dialed 911. My voice wavered as I described the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me that help was on the way, but the severe weather conditions had slowed their response time. I was left alone with the stranger, whose presence was growing increasingly unsettling. As the intruder moved through the living room, opening cabinets and peering behind doors, I could hardly keep my composure. I begged him to stop, my voice cracking with desperation. He seemed to be driven by a frenzied urgency that made me question his true intentions. My fear grew as I watched him, unable to predict what he might do next. Minutes felt like hours until, finally, the distant sound of sirens pierced the night's oppressive silence. The police arrived, their flashing lights casting an eerie, pulsating glow through the windows. They quickly apprehended the intruder, who was eventually identified as a man named Jason. They confirmed that he had indeed been involved in a car accident and was in a state of severe shock, which explained his erratic behavior. Despite the initial shock and fear, the police investigation revealed that Jason had managed to force entry into the house due to a vulnerability in our security, a detail that both frightened and angered me. How had he managed to break in so easily? We had always considered our home secure. The immediate aftermath was a blur of relief and anxiety. The police ensured Jason received medical attention for his injuries and transported him to a nearby hospital. My parents arrived home shortly after the police, and they were understandably shaken. We discussed the incident in detail, and it became clear that while Jason's intentions might have been to seek help, the fear and violation of our personal space were real and unsettling. In the days that followed, we took several steps to reinforce our home security, installing new locks, security cameras, and motion detectors. The incident had revealed a critical lapse in our safety measures, and we were determined to prevent anything like it from happening again. The emotional impact of that night lingered far longer than the physical changes to our home. The sense of safety that once felt like a given was now something to be actively maintained and guarded. The haunting memory of Jason's appearance, his bloodied clothes, and his unsettling presence became a constant reminder of the fragility of our sense of security. Though the immediate danger had passed, the psychological scars remained. I learned to be more cautious and aware, to trust my instincts, and to never take safety for granted. In the winter of 2014, my family faced a major relocation that required a grueling 9-hour drive to our new home. I had recently earned my driver's license and was tasked with driving our car to the new house, accompanied by my dad. My mum and sisters decided to fly, leaving us to navigate the icy, snow-covered roads. The plan was straightforward. We would drive through the night, aiming to arrive around midnight. However, the winter landscape, initially picturesque, quickly turned hostile. A blizzard began to brew, and soon the snow was falling so heavily that visibility dropped to near zero. I expressed my concerns about the worsening conditions, but my dad insisted we could handle it, downplaying the severity of the storm. By early evening, the blizzard had intensified. Snow pounded relentlessly against the windshield, and the road ahead was barely discernible. My heart raced as the car struggled to maintain traction on the slick, icy road. Despite my growing unease, my dad remained steadfast, never suggesting we stop or seek shelter. Around 8 p.m., our situation took a turn for the worse. The storm raged on and the driving conditions deteriorated rapidly. Suddenly we hit a patch of ice and the car began to skid uncontrollably. I fought to regain control, but the car spun violently, veering off the road and crashing into a snowbank. The impact jolted us and the car came to a halt, buried in the snow. We were stranded with no other vehicles in sight and the storm growing fiercer by the minute. My dad tried to use his phone to call for help, but the signal was weak and unreliable in the storm. As we sat in the freezing car, the wind howling outside, a sense of isolation and dread settled over us. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, we saw headlights piercing through the blizzard. A vehicle approached, moving slowly through the snow. Relief washed over me as I hoped for assistance. However, when the vehicle finally came to a stop beside us, I was met with a chilling sight. The driver, a man in his mid-50s, stepped out of his truck, his face obscured by a thick beard and a worn hat. His demeanor was unnervingly calm as he approached our car. "Need a hand?" he called out, his voice barely audible over the wind. My dad, despite his apprehension, gratefully accepted the offer, explaining our situation and asking if he could help us get back on the road or call for a tow truck. The man's expression shifted subtly, and he began asking odd questions about our destination and our travel plans. My dad, sensing something off about the situation, tried to keep the conversation focused on getting assistance. The man's responses were vague and evasive, and his insistence on helping us seemed increasingly insincere. A shiver of fear ran down my spine when the man mentioned that he knew a shortcut through the woods that could get us to safety. The idea of following a stranger into the stormy wilderness was terrifying, but with no other options, we reluctantly agreed. The man offered to lead us, guiding us through the blizzard with his truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. As we followed his truck, the storm grew more intense. The snow piled up, and the wind howled around us, creating an eerie, suffocating atmosphere. After what felt like hours, we finally reached a small, dimly lit cabin hidden deep in the woods. The man gestured for us to follow him inside, claiming it was a safe place where we could wait out the storm. My dad hesitated, but with no better options, we followed him into the cabin. The interior was surprisingly warm but sparsely furnished. The man offered us hot drinks and insisted we stay until the storm passed. As we sat in the dimly lit room, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The man's behavior was increasingly unsettling, and I noticed that he was watching us closely, his eyes never leaving us. My dad, sensing our discomfort, excused himself to check the car and see if there was any chance of getting it unstuck. The man offered to accompany him, and they stepped outside into the blizzard. I was left alone in the cabin, my anxiety mounting with each passing minute. Minutes turned into an eternity as I waited in the cabin, the blizzard raging outside. Finally, my dad returned, his face pale and filled with concern. He explained that the man had been acting strangely and that he had seen what looked like other vehicles or tracks in the snow, leading him to suspect that this place might not be as safe as it seemed. We decided to leave the cabin, despite the storm's fury. We quickly gathered our things and made our way back to the car. As we drove away, the man watched us from the cabin, his face illuminated by the faint light of the storm. We didn't stop until we found a more secure shelter, where we could wait out the blizzard in safety. In the end, we never discovered the true intentions of the strange man or the legitimacy of his offer. The unsettling encounter left us shaken and wary. The memory of that night in the blizzard, the feeling of being lured into a potentially dangerous situation, stayed with us for years. I remember that January vividly. The storm had transformed Blackwood into a frozen wasteland, blanketed in snow with no end in sight. The flakes were so enormous they looked like giant white quarters tumbling from the sky. The wind howled through the town like a pack of wolves, and everything was swallowed by a thick, white shroud that seemed to press in on us from all sides. I was at the train station, my last hope for escape. The station was an old relic, its dim light barely cutting through the encroaching gloom. The big clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second a reminder of the time slipping away as the storm raged outside. I was clutching my coat tightly, my breath forming little clouds in the frigid air. My visit to my grandmother had stretched too long, and now I was desperate to return to the city. The old train arrived with a groan and a hiss of steam. It was battered and outdated, but it was our lifeline. As soon as the doors opened, we hurried aboard. I found a seat by the window, hoping the view of the storm would somehow distract me from the growing sense of dread. As the train lurched forward, the world outside disappeared into a blinding whirl of white. The train ride started uneventfully, but the storm soon intensified. The snowfall grew heavier, turning the landscape into a featureless blur. The wind battered the train, and the whole car shook with each gust. The once warm, bustling train became increasingly claustrophobic. As night fell, the storm showed no sign of abating. The conductor's voice came over the intercom, strained and uneasy. "We're encountering severe weather conditions. We may be delayed. Please remain calm and stay in your seats." Unease spread like wildfire through the cabin. The heater, a relic of a bygone era, struggled against the cold. The warmth it provided was barely enough to stave off the chill that seeped through the cracks in the train's aging structure. The train's lights flickered ominously before plunging us into darkness. The only illumination came from the emergency lanterns, casting eerie, shifting shadows on the walls. Panic erupted. People whispered and murmured, their voices tinged with fear and frustration. I tried to steady my breathing, but every gust of wind seemed to echo through the empty space of the train. Then a figure began to move down the aisle. It was a man, dressed in a dark coat, his face obscured by the shadows. He walked slowly, methodically, checking on each passenger. His eyes, when they met mine briefly, were unsettlingly hollow. It was as if he was not fully present, or perhaps not fully alive. The hours dragged on and the storm showed no signs of easing. The train had come to a complete stop, its engines silent. The temperature inside dropped, and the cold became unbearable. The conductor's voice crackled over the intercom again, but this time there was no reassurance, only a thinly veiled fear. "We're experiencing severe mechanical failure. We might be stuck here for some time." The darkness inside the train grew thicker. The emergency lanterns cast long, ghostly shadows, and the atmosphere became suffocating. The passengers, huddled together for warmth, spoke in hushed tones, their fear palpable. Some of them claimed to see figures moving just beyond the reach of the train's lights, while others whispered of strange, ghostly voices carried by the wind. I tried to stay calm, but my anxiety was growing. The shadowy figure I'd seen earlier was no longer just outside the train. It was moving through the car, its form shifting and changing into grotesque shapes. It seemed to feed off our fear, growing more defined and menacing with each passing moment. The cold continued to intensify, and the darkness seemed to close in from all sides. The passengers were no longer just afraid, they were terrified. The once orderly chaos had devolved into full-blown panic. Some screamed incoherently, while others clung to each other in a desperate bid for warmth and comfort. I was alone in my seat, unable to escape the growing sense of dread. The shadowy figure moved closer, its form now almost touching mine. Its presence was suffocating, a dark force that seemed to drain all hope and warmth from the cabin. At some point, the storm outside began to weaken, but the damage had been done. The train was still, a ghostly relic trapped in a frozen world. The shadowy figure was gone, but its presence lingered, a lingering sense of dread that was almost physical. When dawn finally broke, the storm had left behind a landscape of twisted snow and ice. The train's engines roared to life, but the sense of relief was overshadowed by the horror of what we had endured. As we finally pulled into the station, I looked around at the other passengers. Their faces were as pale and hollow as mine, marked by the terror we had shared. I left the train, stepping out into the cold light of day, but the nightmare of that night stayed with me. The storm had passed, but the shadowy figure, the darkness we'd all felt, had left a mark that would never fully fade. And that's how I remember it. The last train out, a vessel caught in a storm of our own making, haunted by fears both seen and unseen. If you've encountered a terrifying event, or have a spine-chilling horror story to share, we at Eerie Shadows want to hear from you. Share your experiences with us and let's uncover the mysteries lurking in the eerie shadows together. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more eerie tales and spine-chilling stories like this one.